As we mentioned earlier in the program, there have been several alarming new reports that the climate crisis is getting worse and coming on faster, from intensifying wildfires to methane leaks to rising sea levels. The news is grim. William Brangham is here to walk us through some of the latest. So, hello, William. Let me start with this report from the UN about wildfires. It says that we are going to see catastrophic wildfires in the coming decades. Fill out more of the picture for us.
That's right, Judy. This is the first time the UN has looked specifically at wildfires. And as you say, they argue that because largely of climate change, catastrophic wildfires will be happening globally, and they'll be ramping up in the next few decades. And it's not just places that have become somewhat accustomed to them, like Australia or the United States. It's places that are not accustomed to them, like Siberia and the Arctic and Tibet. The UN says climate change is the main driver here. This report said the heating of the planet is turning landscapes into tinderboxes. We certainly see this here in the US. There's this mega drought happening out west that is the worst mega drought we've had since the medieval times. But there's another issue that's driving this that the UN says, and that is the way we use land. Agricultural practices, forestry practices have also exacerbated this so that when a fire does start, it's worse. And this is also, as we know, a huge health issue. Ask anyone that has lived anywhere near a wildfire in the last few years. The sky turns orange, you can't go outside, you can't breathe. We know that smoke is dangerous for human health, and that smoke travels hundreds and thousands of miles. So it is a growing issue.
And part of the report, William, I understand, does address ways to deal with this growing threat.
That's right, Judy. As you might imagine, curtailing greenhouse gas emissions to reduce climate change is the single biggest thing we can do. Less oil, less gas, less coal. But as I mentioned, with these land use issues, there are better ways that you can manage the landscape, not letting people move into tinderbox areas, farming in a smarter way, managing forests in a smarter way, using prescribed burns in a smarter way. So there are things that can be done. It's not hopeless, but we've got to start acting.
And then the second report, William, out today from the International Energy Agency, the IEA, on methane emissions, saying that they are coming far worse, far larger than had been expected. Why does this matter?
It matters because methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases out there. It is much more potent than carbon dioxide. It doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but when it is there, it is much better at trapping heat. And the IEA report pointed out that the countries that have been trying to track their methane emissions have been underestimating those emissions by about 70%, which is a huge, it's not just a rounding error. That is a huge amount of methane that is leaking into the atmosphere that these countries and companies don't seem to be aware of. So one of the main goals in tackling climate change is cutting our methane emissions. But if you don't really know how much you're actually emitting, you can't do a very good job of that.
And then if this isn't enough, William, there was yet another report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration out last week about sea level rise and saying this is happening much faster than expected. Lay out some of that for us.
This report has got to be setting off alarm bells in coastal communities all over the world. I mean, the NOAA said that in the next 50 years, they expect with fairly good confidence that sea level rise will go up about 10 to 12 inches. Now, that may not sound that much. It's about this much sea level rise. But just here in the U.S., there are major metropolitan areas, New York, Miami, Washington, New Orleans, parts of California, that are living right at sea level rise. And so 10 inches to a foot of sea level rise can have major impacts on infrastructure. Streets will be flooded much more often, not just on stormy days. Infrastructure will take a big hit. And so there's also a concern that report in and of itself is alarming enough, but a worry that might even be a lowball projection because of this ongoing question as to how much global warming is impacting the ice sheets in Greenland and in Antarctica. And in Antarctica specifically, there is a glacier there, the Thwaites Glacier, that is already showing signs of trouble. That glacier is holding 2 to 3 feet of potential sea level rise in its ice. So if that were to go, we're talking about, as one researcher we spoke with saying, a global rewriting of the coastline all over the world.
Well, it doesn't get any more sobering than all of this. Let's hope people are not only paying attention, but thinking about how we do something about all this if we can. William Brangham reporting on these distressing reports. Thank you, William.
Thanks, Judy.